So thank you to all of us, to all of you who are joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We have people joining from all over the world to this very first joint MAPS PEFA webinar. We have put a lot of effort at both secretariats to have a fruitful event, which will give a lot of insight into how the tools interlink, what's their use, and with a really practical case, how could a country use the tools to reform and improve both public financial management and their procurement system. So we will now see complementarities of MAPS and the PEFA tools. First, I'd like to start with some rules. This meeting is being recorded. So we will also share later the recording on our resources webpage. This event is also with interpretation, English and French. We will have one of our presenters present in French today. So I invite you to get familiar right now. You will see on the bottom of your screen, there's a small icon for interpretation. You can switch it on and off for English and French. And this will, again, will be useful for one of the presenters from the PEFA Secretariat, which will address us in French. Please do submit your questions. We want this to be as interactive as possible. We want for you to participate, to ask questions, to let us know any comments you have. So you can use the chat function, and you can also tag using the hashtag MAPS PEFA on social media. So with that, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Erika Gerritsen, Acting Director for Sustainable Finance, Investment and Jobs, Economy that Works for the People at DG INPA, European Commission. The floor is yours, Erika. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, for this introductory word and for the opportunity to be here with you today. It is really a great pleasure for me to open this joint MAPS PEFA webinar, and I would really like to warmly thank both the MAPS and the PEFA secretariats and your teams for organizing this event today. This initiative, indeed, of the two secretariats to organize this joint webinar is really welcome, because it will show the complementarity of these two diagnostic tools: public finance management with PEFA, public procurement with MAPS, which we consider is absolutely undeniable. And I'm really looking forward, and I think it's really positive that we have the opportunity to hear the experience from Zambia, where the use of these tools has been tested, and the complementarity of these tools has been tested. So really interesting program, looking forward. From the European Commission's perspective, we really strongly support this complementarity. We have been supporting actually both the projects, the PEFA and the MAPS from their beginning. And we are also supporting the role of the secretariats, as well as in their quality controllers role. So for us, as initial supporters of both PEFA and MAPS, really a big pleasure for me to be here today, and thanks again for this initiative. Actually, the PEFA is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year, and so there are many events that are taking place, and that's really positive. We are really proud to have been part of this success story. With a widely recognized methodology, an increasing number of country assessments, also sub-national assessments. The secretariats of MAPS will soon celebrate its first anniversary, so it's a little bit younger, but we are convinced that it'll be such a similar success story, and that I hope maybe we will be together in 19 years to celebrate your 20th anniversary. So we will be talking about complementarity a lot today. Of course, the PEFA framework already provides a meaningful information on public procurements. It has indicators, specific indicators, which are looking into this dimension. But we do consider, and it is clearly understood that PEFA only gives a photography of the situation at a certain moment in time, while the MAPS diagnostic tool goes much further and digs in the procurement processes, providing details, underlying causes of weaknesses, as well as recommendations on reforms. And this is where we see PEFA and MAPS being complementary, specifically on the topic of procurement. For us, and as is obvious, and as we are working on in many countries, having a strong and effective public finance management system is absolutely a vital component for good governance. A PFM strategy underpins fiscal and macroeconomic stability and guides the allocation of public resources to national priorities. And it supports the efficient delivery of services, social services, for poverty reduction and for economic development. And it makes possible the transparency and the scrutiny of public funds. So we really see this PFM cycle at the core of the governance, of the public governance, and at the core also of the social contract and the contract between the citizens and the government. So through public procurement more specifically, governments have an impact on the life of their citizens. OECD countries spend 12% of GDP on public procurement. In the EU, public procurement accounts for 16% of the GDP. In developing economies, it can even reach up to 30%. So this is why sound public procurement systems are key to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Indeed, they are prerequisite for effective public service. In addition, tackling integrity risks in procurement contributes to better quality of services for the people and stronger infrastructure. It also enables substantial government savings, resulting in increased domestic resources to further finance other initiatives. So MAPS and PEFA diagnostic tools are flexible thanks to their complementarity modules. And it's really positive that in the last years, a lot of effort has been made to develop specific modules in relation to climate and green or sustainable finances, public finance, digital, gender. These are areas which are at the core of the European Commission's priority, the leading to the digital and the green transition, the twin transition as we call it, and which is at the center of our President Ursula von der Leyen's priorities. High quality diagnostic tools are the basis to inform, develop, and monitor government reforms in public finance management at large and public procurement systems in particular. So the European Commission supports these reforms through policy dialogue. We also are one of the donors that still provide widely budget support, which is direct grant budget support to the budgets of our partner countries' governments. Also providing a lot of technical assistance to accompany these reforms. Furthermore, objective, solid and inclusive assessments help create the necessary buy-in from various government agencies to implement the necessary reforms. Also, quality diagnostic tools such as MAPS and PEFA help donor coordination to support reforms. And at the core of this donor coordination support, there is the real big importance of the country ownership. Reforms can only be successful if they are country owned, if the government is in the driving seat, and this is really when donors can help to the best. And this is why I'm really looking forward to hearing about the Zambia experience, on how PEFA and MAPS helped in the Zambian government reform endeavor in these areas. I don't want to be longer. I think again there is a really rich agenda for today, and again I really welcome the organization of this joint seminar, and would like to seize the opportunity to say a happy birthday to PEFA, but also happy birthday to MAPS secretariats, and congratulations again for the event. And over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Erika. Big partners of us, of both initiatives, the European Commission. So now let's to start this exercise. I would like to invite Tia from the PEFA Secretariat to guide us a bit on a couple of polls we have to hear from the audience. So Tia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Erica, Nicola, and on behalf of PEFA Secretariat also, welcome everybody. So to start the discussion today, we would like to hear from you. What do you think about procurement challenges, and where do you think that we need more information on? You will see a poll pop-up window on your screen. There are 2 questions there. Please read the questions, but also choose the answers and then submit the right answers on the screen. So the first question, it is about which of these processes pose the biggest risks and challenges related to procurement. You see different options there about whether it's allocating, securing the budget, whether it's identifying and analyzing the market, whether it's selecting a vendor through competitive procedures, whether it's having the stakeholders engage in a meaningful way and addressing their complaints, and whether it's contract management, paying invoices, or whether it's then auditing and monitoring the whole process and its integrity. The second question is then more related to the frameworks that we're talking about today. As you heard, we have PEFA framework that looks at BFM systems, including procurement. And then we have the MAPS framework, particularly drilling down on procurement issues. Which of these same areas do you need more information on? Which areas that you would benefit having an assessment looking at the performance and how is it doing? So let's see, we'll keep it a few more minutes or a few more moments, and then we'll see what the results are. Interesting to see whether they are similar or whether they differ at all in the responses. There we are. Let's see. The first question, we seem to be having quite a lot of issues in terms of managing contract, selecting a vendor through competitive procedures, and then identifying the need and analyzing the market. And then the second question, where do we need more information on? Again, it seems to be identifying the need and analyzing the market is quite high, and so is the contract management and auditing procedures. There we are. Okay. Should we end the poll? And let's see, where did we end up? So the first question, which are the most challenging parts of the procurement procedures? It seems to be that we have identifying the need and analyzing the market is coming on top. And so it's managing a contract and its amendments. The least responses we got in terms of paying invoices, which is interesting. The second question in terms of where do you need more information on in terms of the strengths and weaknesses of these procedures. It seems to be that the biggest answer we've got, it is on identifying the need and analyzing the market again. Clearly, there's an issue there that we need to pay more focusing on. And then managing the contract and amendments is also coming on second. And the least responses we got again on paying invoices. So there you are. Let's see how we can address some of these questions and challenges in the presentations today. Thank you so much, everybody. And back to you, Nicola.
Thank you, Tia. So that's really good for introduction and to get us warmed up both on planning and on contract management. I think two topics that are the focus of what procurement experts and PFM experts know that brings a lot of value to the process. So let's see how the tools are really valuable to understanding what is happening there. So right now, we will provide a brief overview of the PEFA and MAPS tools. And how they link together. So for that, I'd like to invite my colleague Jeppe Groth from the MAPS Secretariat, who will be followed afterwards in French by Guillaume Brühl from the MAP Secretariat. So Jeppe, the floor is yours to start us off with what the MAPS is and how it links to PEFA.
Thank you so much for that, Nicholas, and hello everybody from all over the world. It's a great pleasure to have you here today. It's a brief time we have together, so I'm going to dive straight into it and give you a little introduction to what MAPS is. I'm sure that there are many in the audience who already are familiar to a certain extent with the framework, but I want to touch upon the sort of the basics of it nonetheless for the benefit of everybody. So I'm going to start with what you might say the why of MAPS, so the overall purpose of the framework. And I want to direct your attention to the center of this slide, which goes very well in hand with the introduction that we just had from Erika Gertsen at the European Commission. So MAPS is an assessment tool that is meant to provide a foundation for procurement reform in individual countries. So it's intended to be made for the country that is assessed, and it is intended to put the government in the driving seat and to provide a roadmap for improving the procurement system in the specific country. So this also means, and now I'm going to the left-hand side of the slide, that it's a universal tool. It's a tool that can be used for, by all countries, regardless of their size, their political organization, and also of their level of development. We have recently been seeing MAPS assessments in large federations such as India and Ethiopia, and in small countries as well, such as Moldova and a number of Caribbean island states. So it's a tool for everybody. And then finally, it's also a recognized assessment, which means that it is a tool that engages key stakeholders, both within and within the country and internationally. And it's also a tried and tested tool that is trusted to deliver a high quality foundation for further policy work. So those are the overall purposes of the framework, and I'll now go into a little bit more detail with the framework itself on the next slide. If I could get you. Yes, thank you, Nicholas. So MAPS consists overall of 4 pillars, which you can see here with the color code, 14 indicators, 55 sub-indicators, and 210 individual assessment criteria. And I should say just a brief note in the beginning that the number of indicators in the different pillars does not have anything to do with the relative importance. So each pillar is equal in its own right in the assessment framework. So pillar 1 has to do with the existing legal and regulatory framework. This is really sort of the black and white pillar, which is about the laws on the books, whether it covers the entire procurement cycle and all procurement areas, both goods, works, and services, and specialized legislation such as public-private partnerships and concessions. It's also where we look at whether or not the procurement is linked to international organizations and to sustainability goals. So that was pillar 1. Pillar 2 is about the institutional framework and the management capacity of the system. So this is really about the institutions. Are the responsibilities clear? Are they delegated properly? Is it supported sufficiently by a well-functioning information system? This is also where e-procurement is looked at and digitalization of the entire system. And also, crucially, the management capacity. Is the procurement system properly staffed? Is the staff properly trained? How is professionalization going on in the country? And how is the system monitored? These would be the things that assessors would look at in pillar 2. And pillar 3 is where we come to some of the questions that we saw in the poll just now were being considered very important. So this is really the practical operational side of the procurement system. How do the things that we saw in pillars 1 and 2 operate in practice? This has to do with planning, with contract management, with the selection of vendors through procedures. It also has to do with how well the market that correspond to the public side of the procurement system is functioning. So in this pillar, we're looking at also at the dialogue between the private sector and the public sector, the access that the private sector has to the procurement system in the country in question, and also what the system, so the country authorities are doing to support development in the market. So are there sector strategies for particularly important sectors? Something that we have seen during the recent COVID crisis, of course, can be a very important and difficult part to manage. Finally, we have the fourth pillar, which is really about the integrity of the system. So here we're looking at anti-corruption, also the control system. Again, one of the questions we saw ranking fairly high in the poll just a minute ago, and also civil society engagement. How is civil society engaged? How is their access? And are civil society organizations viewed as a key partner in the procurement system? So that's the basics of the system. And for all sub-indicators, for all pillars, there are a number of criteria listed, and the assessment team will look at these criteria. They are formulated as aspirational statements, which are based on international best practices. So the assessors will compare the situation in the assessed country to that particular criteria. Aside from these four pillars and the core of the framework, there are, as you can see in the center of this graphic, some supplementary aspects of the framework. What I want to mention here are the supplementary modules. Right now we have sustainable public procurement and professionalization. These follow the same structure as the core methodology, but go more into detail about this particular subject. So MAPS and PEFA. Of course, in the MAP Secretariat, and when we read MAP reports, we see how connected public financial management and public procurement systems are. And MAPS and PEFA are connected both in the general level, but also specifically. And I will get into the specifics in detail in just a second. So for the general reference, what we would fairly often see when looking at MAPS reports and MAPS assessment is that PEFA reports often constitute a part of the motivation for conducting a MAPS assessment. And as an example, recently in Ethiopia, a MAPS assessment was completed on the shoulders, as it were, of a previous PEFA evaluation in 2019 that had shown some deterioration on the procurement performance in the indicators related to that in the PEFA framework. So a MAPS assessment in that context can provide a more in-depth analysis of those shortcomings and also show the Ethiopian government how to address those shortcomings. So hopefully with both the MAPS assessment and the PEFA evaluation, next time a PEFA evaluation is done in Ethiopia, we should hopefully be able to see some performance improvement on the procurement indicators. So which indicators are we talking about? In the PEFA framework, the indicator 24 is concerned with procurement management. And many of MAPS indicators are directly aligned with dimensions under the PEFA indicator 24. You can see here the first two. This within the first pillar concerns the application and coverage of the legal and regulatory framework. And it really has to do in this context with public access to the information, which is also, as you can see, what is scored in the PEFA dimension. Similarly, when we look at the MAPS indicator 7A, which has to do with the extent to which the procurement system is supported by information technology, again, it has to do with the publication of various key documents within the procurement cycle, which is again something that's looked at in PEFA's indicator 24. And this goes on the next slide, as you can see, with more MAPS indicators aligned with PEFA's dimensions. I would like to highlight on the final slide a whole indicator where we go beyond the indicator 24 of the PEFA framework. And this has to do with the control system, where you can see on the right-hand side a number of PEFA indicators which are feeding into the map sub-indicator 12A, which has to do with the control system and how it functions in the particular country. So as you can see, and as we very often see reading reports, information gathered in PEFA assessments or evaluations will very often feed into MAPS reports and will be used as a key information for a MAPS assessment. One difference is that MAPS does not provide a scoring in the same manner as PEFA does, and we will see how that scoring is playing out when I hand over the floor to Guillaume, and I'm going to do that now. But back to you, Nicolas. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeppe, for a quick overview. Of course, because of time, we cannot dive deep into each of the topics. Just want to remember you that Guillaume will address us in French. So if you need interpretation, you can click on the small icon with a world and choose the channel that you prefer. Alors, Guillaume, c'est à toi maintenant. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Nicolas.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, and also Jeppe for his introduction. So I will do this presentation in French to be more inclusive for French attendees. So here you have some characteristics of the, well, you've been told about the MAPS framework. It's universal, for example. And so PEFA actually has the same characteristics, which I will not repeat again. So there is a main framework that was adopted in 2016 with a methodology and also 2 additional modules, which are linked to gender and climate. And also a methodology that was developed to help countries to use their PEFA report and improve PFM. But what is different with PEFA is that it covers the whole public management, public finance management. And there are 7 pillars that you can see here. And there are also several indicators under those 7 pillars that you can see here. And so now we have a database to help our clients. And so we're going to give you some lesson that we have from this database of all the different PEFA reports that have been made in the past, and also what the trends are. So first, I will tell you about the dynamic, the trend over the last few years, from 2015 to 2021. And we have a database of 70 countries, which allow us to draw those trends. So among those 70 countries, well, 39 of them have improved their performance, and 31 have actually seen a drop in their performance or stagnation. So there are antagonistic movements sometimes within the same regions. And globally, we can see, for example, in Asia, that actually the performance has gone down in most countries. So you can see there's been also an improvement of the framework, the legal and regulatory framework, like almost 80% of countries have improved their regulatory framework and 60% the legal framework. That's the case, for example, of Bhutan, of Madagascar. There's, however, a stagnation or even a deterioration in the use of competitive methods. And also we can see some reforms have had contradictory effects. For example, in some countries, the change of legislation have improved the regulatory framework, but at the same time, we allowing more exceptions and exonerations, which actually reduce the efficiency of the whole process. In other countries, there's actually more transparency, but because of but there is also a reduction of the recourse to the complaints handling organ. The interpreter apologizes, but the sound of the orator is not very good, unfortunately. Here in this slide, you can see the performance, an average performance that is based on 86 reports. And the average notation here is C, which is a basic level of performance. But actually, the situations are widely different from one country to another. For example, if you look at Europe and Central Asia region has generally a good performance. We received 8 reports from this zone in this period. And generally, operations are correctly recorded in databases, they are complete and they're reliable. And only one country has a less than 90% reliability here. The rate of competitive bidding is between 80 and 90%, which is quite high. And generally, the mechanism for resolving complaint is independent as well. However, it does not always give take decisions in a very reasonable time frame. However, if you look at Asia Pacific, we received 11 reports from different countries, for example, Indonesia, or some small Pacific Island countries. And here we can see that their performance was not as good. For example, databases are mostly incomplete because, for example, some very small operations are not actually being recorded, or because there is a lack of a centralized information recording mechanism, or because also there's no rules as to what information must be recorded or not. And sometimes also the database actually only reflects what is taken into account on e-procurement platforms, which actually limits the availability of information. The rate of competitive bidding is between 80 and 90%, but only for 5 countries. And for the other countries, we cannot actually know what the exact percentage is because the quality of data is not good enough. Generally, data on complaints and statistics generally are not very good. They are partially available. And finally, in 5 countries, the complaints handling mechanism is not independent. And in one of them, it's not even effective at all. And finally, I will make a link with the whole process of public finance management. And here on this slide, you can see there's a big problem with expense areas, or expenditure areas, sorry. And even the best performing countries only have a notation of C. So generally, there's like this generalized payment areas for providers or vendors. And also this really limits the efficacy of the purchasing units. Also, another element, there's a very strong weakness of internal and external audit functions. And so this means that there's generally control systems are very weak or are weakly controlled.
qui ne passe pas au travers des cadres traditionnels de contrôle, et aussi un manque de feedback et d'opportunités.
And there's also a lack of feedback and opportunity to improve systems generally, because there's not enough, there's not a good feedback system in place. So here you really have an opportunity to improve and develop audit so as to improve feedback on the finance management system itself. So here, to conclude, you see that you can really use the PEFA database to really see what the trend is in a country or in regions, and also to compare the public procurement system with the whole general finance management system. Thank you very much.
So I think it was really interesting to see both methodologically, but also from the data of the countries, how this is playing right now. And just before we get started on the country case, I'd like to invite Simon Chirva, practice manager from the World Bank, to speak about how the World Bank sees public financial management and public procurement reform. So Simon, the floor is yours to speak a bit about this before we give the floor to Ida and hear about the Zambian case. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, maybe even good night, wherever you are. First, I'd like to say happy birthday to PEFA for the 20th anniversary. Also to thank the PEFA and MAP Secretariat for organizing this session. I think it's important that such collaboration where you organize such events, maybe at country level, would really help in harmonizing the two tools. So this should just be a start. I think we should try to do more of such events where we work together in planning both assessments. I will share my experience first, I think, from the bank's perspective on how we look at public procurement linking with PEFA, but also I will share my experience of carrying out this assessment in a number of countries, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, and India. And so what are the issues that we can work on to improve the interlinking of the two systems? I think let me start from a data perspective. So one of the things that we know is that procurement, public procurement, is a large part of the GDP. We always say 10 to 30%, and in some countries we indicate it's about 50% of the annual budgets. But what is missing is that we do not have accurate data on how much public procurement is in each country. I think this is an area and a theme that will be playing out throughout this workshop in terms of public procurement. We need to find a way of accurately measuring public procurement. If we cannot measure public procurement, it's very difficult for senior officials in government to have interest in public procurement. Secondly, though we have challenges in measuring public procurement, but as Erica has indicated, public procurement has become more relevant this time in the aftermath of COVID, as countries are facing stressed budgets due to COVID, but at the same time, we want to resuscitate the economies through building back better, with the emphasis of green procurement and sustainable procurement. So how we look at public procurement becomes even more important now. As we have seen from the survey results, and this is consistent with the World Bank experience, that Pillar 3 of the MAPS assessment, which is procurement operations and market practices, is perhaps the most difficult to assess, particularly because we do not have adequate data on the planning aspect and downstream contract management. So maybe we have to look more on how this aspect could be improved. MAPS, as already indicated, is very much related to PEFA. But I would also just want to mention, I think, a few areas that perhaps we could do to improve this. First is the time horizon in which the two assessments are done. In some cases, these assessments are done years apart in one particular countries, and it's very difficult to rely on each other. So maybe we have to look at what period in terms of the horizon these two assessments are done. I think while it has also been indicated that the two are closely linked, which I fully agree, but I think certain indicators that are in the PEFA assessment need to be better harmonized and better linked with the MAP secretariat, especially when you are looking at procurement method, how it's judged. I think the two are not necessarily the same, and I think we can do better in harmonizing how we measure competition, how we measure the selection of methods. I think these are areas that perhaps we may need to do more together. Often, I think when we do, my experience when we do this assessment, that there is always a lot of attention on the acceptability of the report, and we struggle at the end of the assessment, the report is acceptable. In principle, this should not be a problem, but it shows that perhaps the upfront dialogue and engagement processes are very important when you are carrying out these assessments. Otherwise, if the government does not have buy-in, then we see at the end of the process that we have challenges on reports being accepted. Now, on looking at the MAPS assessment itself, as both Erica and Nicholas have said, perhaps we have to look at how we can better transform it to be more data-based and perhaps more output-based. I think the current assessment is more compliance-based, which perhaps was good maybe 20 years ago when we are starting to build up rules and laws. But now that we have, most countries have rules and laws, I think we have to try to think of how we can transform the assessment to be more output-based so that it can inform better development of the system. And this should be possible with the advent of e-procurement system where data is available. Finally, I just want to maybe to bring to the attention that these assessments are done, and it looks they are done very irregular, especially in case of a public procurement. So perhaps we need to have a discussion in terms of the periodicity and regularity of these assessment and how updates can be shared. The current situation which we have now is that in some countries, this assessment like MAPS assessment or equivalent of MAPS assessment was done almost 20 years ago, which is a lost opportunity in terms of continuously assessing how the systems are evolving. With those remarks, let me end here to end my 5 minutes of which I was given, and I would like to thank the organizers, and again to call that perhaps we could continue working better together to ensure that these two systems are done at the same time, and also to wish happy birthday again to the PEFA Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I think you raised very important points on how this work about harmonizing these tools and how these can be used in countries needs to further discussion. And I think this will always be the case of continuously improve both tools. So as we are a bit running out of time, I would now like to invite Ida from the Zambian Public Procurement Authority to provide us with an overview of how MAPS and PEFA worked in the Zambian context. And Ida, if you can be as concise as possible so that we can later have a bit of a discussion and tackle some of the questions that are already on the chat. So, Ida, the floor is yours to present on the Zambian case. Ida, are you there? Maybe while we check on your connection, I think we can start.
No,
Are you
Sorry,
there?
I just
Okay.
stepped out. I'm
Okay.
here.
Thank you. So we were saying if you could share the insights of MAPS and PEFA, the assessments in Zambia, and if you could do that as concisely as possible, bearing in mind the time constraints. The floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. I think, as alluded to, the Zambian government, through our institution, in collaboration with the World Bank and other development partners, we carried out an assessment of the public procurement system was carried out in 2019. And this was largely in 4 categories under the pillars of MAPS. So there was a legislative and regulatory framework, institutional framework and management capacity, procurement, operations and market practices, then accountability, integrity, and transparency. I think we already saw the pillars, which was area shared. And coming to the procurement in Zambia, we have a new act. It's called the Public Procurement Act number 8 of 2020. And we still have the regulations from 2011. We are hoping that they will now be signed by the new Minister of Finance so that we can have the current regulations. And there's also the Public Finance Act of 2018, which is helps in which has the guidelines for the public finance management. As alluded to earlier by other speakers, for Zambia, 15% of the GDP accounts for procurement accounts for 15% of the GDP, and when you look at the overall total national expenditure is about slightly over 50%, and these are from the expenditures that we've been having from 2018 to date. Then our act requires that we do procurement planning as part of the budget process, and a prerequisite for procurement proceedings. This is contained in our act. And when we come to the overview of how MAPS 2 assessment was conducted, we know that MAPS is a universal tool used to assess the quality and effectiveness of procurement systems. It highlights where reforms are most needed and indicate how reforms can be best carried out. And we talked about the assessment that was done for ZPPA, and prior to that, ZPPA was called Zambia National Tender Board. There was also a country procurement assessment review, which was carried out in 2003. So you can see that we actually come from a long way. Then the assessment had 2 developmental objectives. 1, to assess the strength and weakness and the gaps of the public procurement system, and then benchmark it with international best practices, as well as to help government prioritize efforts in public procurement reforms. So this one, I think, like the one which we was repealed 2008, it was based on the UNICITRO model. So, but we've continued getting best practices. The MAPS 2 in Zambia had 14 indicators with 55 sub-indicators, and it analyzed both the qualitative and the quantitative criteria. It was set up to provide oversight and overall direction, and the representation was from ministries, parastatal, civil society, and private sector. And this was led by us, ZPPA, as the authority. And during this study, there was a lot of emphasis on understanding the country content, and then especially the steering committee emphasized on the need to have the local consultants, so that as they were important stakeholders, and I think they did understand the system well. Then the PEFA assessment. The PEFA assessment was ZPPA participated under the PEFA, which was jointly carried out by the assessment team, and the officials were drawn from government as well as the World Bank, and this was in 2016. And the assessment was undertaken. The assessment was undertaken. Sorry, I forgot to switch on the video. Under the public financial management reform program, and of course it was a multi-donor fund, or comprising of UK DFID and KWF, that is under Germany. And the objective was to identify areas of strength or weaknesses in the government and the financial management system. And it was a high-level joint donor committee. PEFA had assessments specifically which examined key aspects of procurement, like public access to procurement information. Then we had 3 key procurement information elements that were assessed. This was the regulatory framework, the bidding opportunities, as well as the contract awards. Can move to the next one. The review, PEFA review, the elements and the findings. As alluded to, under the 4 key elements that were assessed, the following was were the 4 key elements. There was the procurement monitoring, and here there was data was maintained manually due to the absence of an electronic system. Then procurement methods, competitive methods were used for over 70% of the procurement methods, and in our act, this is promoted so that there's a value for money. Public access to procurement information. Here, 3 key procurement elements were available. There was a regulatory framework, bidding opportunities, and contract awards. Then the 4th one was the procurement complaints management. And here it actually had to do more with the appeal process system. And the score was C+. The conclusion was that the database for procurement information is needed to enhance monitoring capability. More consistent arrangements are needed for procurement planning, and then the dispute resolution and the avail procurement statistics. So we see that here the grade was kind of low. And then for maps, the key findings were that the legislative, under the legislative and regulatory framework, the maps to summarize the key strengths in the Zambia's procurement legal system as a comprehensive public procurement legal framework. We had the act as well as the regulations, that's the legal framework. Then the legal system covers a well-functioning public procurement system. And then ZPPA, the act establishes the ZPPA as an independent and regulatory body. It also establishes the open tendering as a default method and provides conditions for use of less competitive methods. I think, like I mentioned, this brings about value for money because you have so many players in the market. Then contract management functions and management are clearly outlined in the public procurement regulations. And I think even partly in the main act. Then contractual disputes can be resolved through arbitration, which is more expedient. So that's also one of the things. Then when it comes to weaknesses, these were the ones which were identified. One was lack of clarity around procurement involving international relations. And international relations meant accommodation of foreign bidders. Then there was also the draft public procurement bill of 2017, improvements and weaknesses. This one, I think now it's no longer there, it's already an act. Then continued lack of clarity of activities concerning international relations and international agreements, ZPPA and Attorney General respective roles. Then there was also the issue of patch time status of newly proposed complaints review body. This one, MAPS felt that we needed an independent body apart from the one which was doing looking at reviews internally, so to say. Then mandatory association of foreign bidders as a condition for participation. This was seen as like a hindrance to competition. MAPS was of the opinion that these should freely participate. Then lack of judicial review of the decisions by ZPPA or complaints review body. Like I mentioned, this one, because the appeals are done internally, there was that expression that there was a lack of judicial review, but of course it goes to arbitration for those who are not satisfied. Then introduction of high value procurement committee under Ministry of Finance, and the necessity to consider introducing a provision on mandatory use of the EGP by OPEs within a specified and realistic time frame. This has been addressed because now we have a mandatory use of the PEs under Section 16 of our Act, and we've just given them a time frame of 3 years. So after 3 years, everyone is supposed to come on board on the EGP.
Ida, if I may, just because of time, maybe we could share some of these insights and the presentation for people to watch these detailed findings. But maybe if I may, just if we could skip to the final part where you really focus on some of the key findings of both recommendations and how it played from your side, and then we can take maybe a couple of questions. So if that's fine, we could focus on that because we are almost running out of time. Maybe how you compare here what was done and how it was useful for you.
Okay, no, that's fine. So the comparison of MAPS and PEFA, the assessments are similar. The focus under procurement was mainly on the regulatory function of ZPPA, where the country was measured against various aspects in financial management. Under MAPS 2, the MAPS 2 was more concerned on the quality and effectiveness of the procurement system as a whole, specifically assessing the strength and weaknesses and gaps of the public procurement system, and benchmarking it with international best practices in order to help government to prioritize efforts in public procurement reforms. But like I said, of course, this was a concern, but we always do that so that we are not like left behind. Then the two assessments have been of great benefit and have helped the country in aligning reforms in public procurement to international best standards. So like I mentioned, we now have the new act in place, and we have implemented some of the MAPS recommendations. The concept of international procurement agreements has been clarified in our act. Then also the diffusion of institutional setup and procurement responsibilities. This one, it was a question of auditors, internal auditors being part of the evaluation committees, but they are just there as observers. And this is clearly stated. Then the mandatory use of the EGP, I've already alluded to it. It's under Section 16 of our Act. Then the Act also has provided for stakeholder engagement, which will facilitate feedback, detection of violation of the Act, and contract performance, among other things. So thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you very much, Aida. As said, we will share these resources, and it was really interesting to understand, actually, from your last slide, how this was put into reform, how a diagnose can really serve for reform purposes. And I think that has been the main topic of what we have discussed today. We started off understanding how planning and contract management are key elements, and the audience actually reflected a bit on that, of the procurement process and of public financial management. And I think we saw also from your presentation how we can actually tackle some of the issues that are found through these two diagnose tools. Maybe if we can just take a couple of questions, and very briefly, if I can ask Guillaume and Yepe, what should a country do if they want to get started with a MAPS or with a PEFA report?
I'll yield the floor to Guillaume to begin with.
Sorry, Nicholas, really, I was answering a question in the chat, so I didn't get the...
Yeah, and actually that's a good point. The questions we will also answer them over the chat, because, well, we will not have the time to answer all of them, but just understanding what should a country that's interested in a PEFA or in a MAPS do. So very concisely, very quickly, what should they begin with for PEFA, and what should they begin with for MAPS?
Okay, so regarding PEFA is a public good. So any government, subnational or national, can undertake a PEFA. So it means that you don't necessarily have to have the support of a development partner or even the PEFA secretariat to undertake a PEFA. Still, if you want to undertake a PEFA, what I would recommend is to either contact the stakeholders you're used to work with, or directly the PEFA secretariat, and let us know that you're interested in undertaking a PEFA. It's for national governments and also subnational governments. The best thing I would say, even for the governments that want to undertake a PEFA out of the scope of a development partner, is at least that the PEFA secretariat is aware, because there is quality assurance arrangements that we call PEFA check. That means that necessarily there is to be a concept note at the beginning of a process, and this concept note has to be reviewed by at least the PEFA secretariat, the government, and 2 additional independent peer reviewers. So yeah, there are some elements to be known before undertaking a PEFA. So at least I would say, please contact PEFA secretariat on the PEFA website, www.pefa.org. I think that's the first step.
And for MAPS, the process is quite similar. The framework is open and available at our website. There is a very strong and also very helpful quality assurance process that starts with reaching out to partners, including the MAPS Secretariat, that will ensure both that we can guide you through the process of the assessment, but also that we can ensure that the assessment and the final report lives up to the standards of the framework.
Thank you. We see another one quickly about emergency decrees. I think that's very common right now related with the COVID situation. So maybe I can take that one, and how we have seen from MAPS partners developing both using the framework, because the framework is flexible enough to guarantee that when you need to understand that legislative and regulatory framework, you also need to understand emergency decrees within that framework and how they are functioning, and if they are functioning well, and also on the practice, what's happening with that, if there's enough information that's being disclosed about emergency procurement. So within the framework, it's completely possible to understand what's happening and even focus a bit, as we have seen lately in some reports that have been submitted to the Secretariat, how these topics are dealt with. And finally, I would like to say that For non-answered questions, these will be gathered and replied on a document that we will publish online. So we will publish these resources along with the presentations and the video and the answers to the questions following this webinar. So thank you for your participation. There you have our contact details. Stay tuned because as we have spoken, there's a lot of development of new reports being published, of new things related to developments of the methodologies, trending topics such as sustainable procurement, climate, both for MAPS, PEFA, how are they taken into account within the methodology? We would like to hear from you and we would like to see use of those modules and those tools that are there on our websites. So on behalf of us, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you to our partners, the European Commission, but also the rest of the partners, many of those which contribute both to the PEFA and the MAPS initiative, because without you, this would not be possible. I think taking back and reflecting on what Erika and Simon also told us today, I think this is, again, at the core of trust between citizens and government, and improving how public procurement works and how public financial management work in a country will translate directly right now into better services and better infrastructure for citizens. So we would like these tools to be used. I think there's a lot of possible discussion on how to better integrate them in terms of the time horizons, in terms of the periodicity, as Simon was saying. But we would, of course, like to see more use. We would like to see countries undertaking both assessments and how practitioners can really let us know how the tools are being used for reform in specific countries. For that, I think country cases such as the one we heard in Zambia are very relevant, and we would like to hear more examples from you. So please do share with us and let us know any questions you have. You have there our contact details, and hope to see you soon in another event, be it jointly or from one or the other secretariat. So thank you, and thank you to the team that organized this. With this, we will stop the webinar. Merci à tous et à toutes. Au revoir.